A quick disclaimer. I wrote a lot of this video back in 2022, shortly after part 1, and now it's a year later. So much has changed. Many of the improvements I talked about in part 1 are going to be implemented, and WMATA has begun talks of which alternative to choose. Even with the age of the material, the script still says what I want to say, so without further ado, here is part 2. Back in the 1960s, when the NCTA, National Capital Transportation Authority, was a thing, and when the idea of a metro in the nation's capital was just some lines on a map, Arlington, Virginia was met with a conundrum. Plans had been drawn up to route the K branch of the metro, now the Orange Line, through the median of the planned I-66 freeway. This bypassed much of the commercial activity that existed along Wilson Boulevard, and by the 1960s, this corridor was also in a poor state. Planners in Arlington looked at the planned metro line as a tool to grow and develop the Wilson Boulevard corridor into something more. After pressuring the NCTA to reroute the line under the corridor, the plans were made firm in the maps from 1967 onwards. After that, sector planning began, and planners wrote out their vision for the Wilson Avenue corridor. They envisioned tall, mixed-use buildings right by 5 new metro stations, with density petering out further away from the stations. Fast forward to today, the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor, or RB for short, has matured into a major economic center in the DC area. Offices and residential high-rises rose around metro stations. Due to this intense walkable development right by the metro stations, people began intensely using the system. With careful planning, Arlington managed to create a premier example of transit-oriented development that is revered around the country. With great success has come issues, and that is where I pick up in the present day. The growth of the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor has created a dense urban core right on top of the orange and silver lines in WMATA's network. Ridership at core stations like Ballston is comparable to the large park and ride oriented stations like Vienna, Fairfax. Speaking from experience, the train was in standing room only through the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor, and after Ballston, there was little to no people standing. With all this high intensity rail usage comes the issue of capacity. Because the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor has put pressure on the metro rail system, from WMATA's own page on the BOS capacity study, trains are estimated to be extremely crowded, 45 or more standees, between Courthouse and Rosslyn. This is where they arrive at the need to de-interline, because the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor needs more service, but is physically handicapped by another line, the Blue Line. First, we must discuss the ideas of trunks and branches. So take the DC Metro. The blue and orange and silver line all interline with each other between Rosslyn and Stadium Armory. Outside this, the lines run by themselves, or with one another line until they reach their respective termini. The section between Rosslyn and Stadium Armory would be a trunk, as it has the full service of all 3 lines combined into one tunnel. The branches are the sections like Stadium Armory to New Carrollton, where there's just the orange. So service is less of that due to there being the orange line. Are you following? Good. Now, as we established in part 1 of this series, which you should watch, WMATA, with many small-scale improvements to its infrastructure and trains, could run a theoretical maximum 30 train per hour along any given line. So, in the example, the BOS trunk would run with 30 train per hour, while the branches would run with less service and all lines must share the same limited space through the trunk. So, for instance, you run 30 train per hour combined through the BOS, and you run 10 train per hour in each line. So headways on the New Carrollton branch would be only 6 minutes, which is perfectly fine for the very suburban nature of this branch. However, we have a slight issue when we look at the Rosslyn-Ballston corridor. The line breaks off from the BOS at Rosslyn and heads south, while the silver and orange continue to Ballston and beyond. Due to the blue branching, this means the majority of the extremely dense and urban RB corridor is served by what is technically a branch. So there's this issue of the RB corridor, with all its density and mix of usage, should be served by a very high train per hour, maybe even 30. However, it cannot get this service, and this is the primary issue of capacity in the BOS trunk. Now, we of course can increase capacity through investments and other things. Again, see part 1 for more. The thing is, with the RB, there is heavy development not located along the trunk, and unless you physically remove the blue line, there's little that can be done to remedy the issue with crowding on the branch. So what do? Well, we de-interline, of course. Simply removing the blue from the equation fixes basically all of our problems. But then, what do we do with the blue line? First, the blue line needs a new trunk. Now, WMATA has thought about this since the 2000s, and ideas usually involve a new Roslyn station and swinging up north to Georgetown. Now, Georgetown is a dense and very walkable neighborhood that has been left out of the metro system. This was not due to community activism and racism in Georgetown, rather that WMATA planners were more focused on serving the employment and suburban centers rather than urban neighborhoods within the district. By bringing all the blue north to Georgetown, the neighborhood finally has a metro connection after all these years. Moving east, we're met with two options, running under M Street or P Street. There are reasons to do both. With M, you serve the top of DC's expansive central business district, and would have to make an awkward connection with the red via pedestrian tunnel at Farragut North. With P Street, you swing north and hit the dense urban neighborhoods of DuPont Circle and connect directly with the red line. Afterwards, the line can serve Logan Circle before swinging back down to Mount Vernon Square. While the M Street alignment scrapes through downtown, P Street hits almost no jobs at all. It's a difficult situation, and could come down to how one views what Metro should look like. However, Metro acts as a regional suburban-urban hybrid system, and as such, in my opinion, it should prioritize serving parts of downtown rather than admittedly dense urban neighborhoods. Fire away in the comments below. With this comes the issue with the red line transfer, if only the combined Farraguts were built. With this, I'd like to take cue from other cities like NYC and Philly, who have large underground passageways to connect stations. Especially with SEPTA in Philly, the downtown concourse not only connects stations within downtown Philly, but other buildings as well, if that section of the concourse is even open at all. A reference in the DC area for this might be the Crystal City Underground. However, this should hopefully be less dead due to the fact that it will also be an active transit passage. If this is built, WMATA should also construct the long-planned Farragut connection between Farragut North and West. The entire concourse from the blue to the orange should be within the fair zone to some extent to allow free transfers between the lines. Now with that out of the way, I've taken cues from WMATA's own alternatives and placed 3 stations at 23rd, Connecticut Avenue, and Thomas Circle. After meeting the yellow and green at Mount Vernon Square, the next logical destination to hit would be Union Station. This is the primary intercity rail station in the DC area and as such is the system's busiest station. Many people use the metro as a connection between their commuter train to wherever their office is in DC. Adding more connections to Union is important, and so the blue line is nicely lined up to meet Union Station. However, there's another split with alternatives. WMATA's own alternatives analysis contains options for the blue to head north to New York Avenue and then College Park, while past ideas have brought up going under H. While pre-silver, the line under H routing make the most sense, given that we have another line that can serve the Largo branch in the blue line's place, we could take the blue elsewhere. Out of the alternatives, the blue line to National Harbor stands out. It's a new radial to a development that's long been after rail service of some sorts. It serves some of the lower income areas along South Capitol, MLK Avenue, and brings more service to parts of South Prince George's County. Note how the main majority black area of PG County is south of the Largo branch, and that there's also only one metro line. So this is definitely assisting in the green, which is doing lots of heavy lifting, serving basically all of southern PG County. With this, my ideal route takes this National Harbor branch. Transfers are at Navy Yard and then heading south through Buzzard Point to connect Aldi Field and then turning across the Anacostia. While WMATA proposes stations around every mile south of St. Elizabeth's, it should be shortened to around every half mile. More stations put more within the close walkshed and means it's easier to get for people to use. While there are 2 main downsides to more stations, they shouldn't pose an issue. First, for travel time from outlying station, the branch already isn't that long, as National Harbor is only 8 miles out. Now for cost, if WMATA could become better with cost control, they could more efficiently use what money they get and could possibly get those 2 new stations at a similar price to a non-cost control proposal without them. Now after the district line, things get interesting. As part of the branch to National Harbor, WMATA proposes this loop with the line crossing over the I-495 bridge into Virginia to connect at Huntington. Now, supposedly this is to take advantage of the reserved transit right-of-way on the Wilson Bridge, but this idea is fraught with conflicting interests and overall how transit should be operated. While I do agree that the need for some kind of connection along the Wilson Bridge to be done, this is not the best way to do it. And here's why. Metrorail is a system of radials, or lines radiating out from the city center. The second Potomac crossing for the Blue Line creates a short bit of a chordal connection, or a line that doesn't connect to the city center, with this bridge crossing being a chordal just between National Harbor and Alexandria. It wouldn't garner much ridership compared to the radial. It also doesn't effectively serve other destinations along I-495 in the area, requiring a combination of lines just to get from, say, Branch Avenue to Landmark area. On top of this, the proposed connection via Huntington conflicts with Fairfax County's own wishes for an extension of the yellow line south of Hybla Valley. The Richmond Highway corridor is already planned for BRT, and longer term, Fairfax County would also wish to have a metro extension south part way along the corridor. This extension is logical with the planned development and should be pursued when the time is right. But this change with the new Blue Line complicates things, requiring constructing a junction after this is built. Also, this would create a confusing service pattern for people to follow. The line being both a radial orbital hybrid means people in DC might be confused on what's the fastest way to National Harbor or Huntington, with signs stating clockwise or counterclockwise instead of the destination. Finally, I just have a better idea of what to do with the Blue Line in Nova. Remember the Columbia Pike streetcar, a project that would run in mixed traffic between Skyline and Crystal City, using small streetcars along the busy Columbia Pike? Well, that project was cancelled in 2015, and in its place better bus service was proposed. Now, the Columbia Pike has had transit promised to it since the original Metro plan, with a dashed blue line that was for the future, in quotation marks. While the Columbia Pike, a dense urban corridor with an existing main commercial corridor, hasn't received any rail transit, the future line to Dulles recently opened in November of 2022. Clearly, it's long overdue the Columbia Pike got something of substance, and this time we should give it what it really deserves. No dinky streetcar, an actual metro line under the Columbia Pike. Also, this line removed the evil reverse branch that exists on the blue and yellow. If you want a short explainer, go check out our Denver video. Now, how would this new line be accomplished? Well, first we start with the most logical junction point, Pentagon. The station is already in a 2-level design, meaning that with some expensive construction, one could rebuild it with 4 tracks and a cross-platform transfer, just like in Montreal. Past this, the line turns onto the Columbia Pike and runs straight down it all the way to Bailey's Crossroads, with stations at South Courthouse Road, Glebe Road, George Mason Drive, and by the Arlington Mill Community Center, and with another potential one by the Air Force Memorial. The line should be made on the cheap, no giant underground vaults, and potentially even no mezzanines to cut down on costs. With these stations, Arlington should seek to recreate the success of the Raleigh and Ballston corridor down here on the Pike, with high-rises at metro stations and a mix of residential, commercial, and offices. At Bailey's Crossroads, the line turns south and is built behind the REI Shopping Center, and then continues turning until it reaches Seminary Road. Another stop is built at the back of Skyline, and right outside the Mark Center, another stop. Turning south along Van Dorn Street in Alexandria, where the West End Transitway runs, another stop can be added at Sanger Ave, before turning south onto Duke Street, and to have another metro stop at the dead Landmark Mall. At Landmark is the end of Phase 1, or what should almost certainly be built as part of the line. The route hits many transit-starved areas like Bailey's, the Mark Center, and Landmark Mall. These are either major employment areas or large swaths of land prime for redevelopment. Past Landmark, the line can continue along the Little River Turnpike. The next stop in Lincolnia could be the last underground stop before the line begins to run in an elevated guideway in the median of the road. Stations could be had at Braddock Road and Annandale before ending at Phase 2, a section that would also be rather useful. Finally, after Annandale, the line continues, elevated, and then dips down again at Old Town Fairfax before turning south to GMU. All in all, the line serves a central route that's missing in Northern Virginia's transit system. Places like Bailey's and Annandale have been designated for increased development by Fairfax County. However, the lack of any rail transit definitely hinders many developers' wishes to build denser development. This would help add new economic engine to another part of the county, much similar to what the Silver Line is. This line would be a huge task, and with expense and NIMBYism, it would be difficult to build. In the end though, it is probably worth it for the expansion of transit to completely new parts of suburban and urban parts of Nova. Now, while I propose the Blue Line to be the one to use this route, the Yellow Line could also take over this branch. With the blue remaining in the new trunk described earlier, it becomes a north-south U-shaped line similar to the red. The main reason to take the yellow along the Pike is that it's much more direct route into downtown than the blue. This is true and is likely with high frequencies that people would transfer to the yellow from the blue to cross more directly into downtown, and if not at Pentagon, then at Roslyn. The point is, either really works. It doesn't matter which does which. I just chose blue in this example because the tracks at Pentagon are simpler. Also, if we're removing the blue, what about Franconia? WMATA's second newest branch, a line comprising of a rail yard, stations surrounded by industry, and a park and ride at the edge of an edge city. There's not too much to go off of here. However, I will link below a post from a good blog talking about infills on Metro, and with it, I copy his ideas for two new infills, Franconia Road and Eisenhower Valley, and then instead run it as a yellow line branch. For the time being, outside any alterations to the yellow, a split makes sense, so say 15 train per hour in the yellow, and around a 6-9 split with 6 to Franconia and 9 to Huntington, with enough to support an eventual extension. And there you have it, one brand spanking new blue line that is completely separated from all other lines and can run at low frequencies. It removes the bottleneck at Roslyn and brings Metro service to many new areas in the region. This line would be transformative, and indeed, it would be at a cost. However, this is one we should be willing to make as a region, and it can be lessened if WMATA worked on ways to reduce transit construction costs. While this is the line the region should pursue, it doesn't exist in any form. The closest part is WMATA's Blue Line to National Harbor proposal that includes the silly Potomac Loop idea. And this is the best rated alternative getting out of the lot. While I think most of the alternatives are decent, the loop should be removed and more stations should be added in. Luckily, WMATA's BAW's capacity project planning process has been pushed back to 2024, and thus there's time to change minds. So we should push WMATA to study this proposal and to consider it as the next part of Metro expansion. Also, quick aside right before the video ends, WMATA's GM, Randy Clark, has been absolutely amazing and he is taking the system in the right direction. If we remembered in a previous video, I talked about enabling automatic operation. Well now, short term, WMATA wants to turn back on ATO, and longer term, with CBTC, they want full automation like SkyTrain in Vancouver. On top of this, the 8000 series will be getting open gangways, like I mentioned in part 1. This means essentially everything I brought up as improvements in part 1, except for 4 doors, is now a possibility. So there's that drop of extremely good news. Now after that, thank you for watching and tune in for other House of Transit content as well as the eventual part 3 of this series.